Welcome to the Land Chat Podcast.
All right, guys, we're back. Another episode of Land Chat Podcast. Today's a special one. We've got Andy Thomas, who's a researcher, author, and conspiracy theorist.
Friend of the show, yeah.
Friend of the show. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about famous conspiracy-themed assassinations. And I'm sure we'd all agree there's quite a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of unanswered questions, and hopefully Andy's going to help us today to kind of answer those questions, give his well-researched kind of opinion. And yeah, so Andy, how you been, mate?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
No worries, mate, no worries.
Brilliant, it's really good, you know. And just want to say, I went to Andy's lecture in Cardiff about conspiracies. I took the wife as well. She absolutely loved it.
The ball and chain.
Days.
Yeah, dragged her along. It was brilliant.
And she's not a conspiracy theorist, but she really enjoyed it, Andy. She absolutely loved it.
Saying that, all through the holiday, she was talking about, especially, you know, what we want to have a good discussion about is Dianna. Princess Diana. She was really taken back by that, actually, and she even went and told her mum, and they had a huge discussion. It was awesome, absolutely awesome.
Interestingly, Andy, sorry, I just couldn't talk my mic here. I did hear somewhere that Meghan, Markle, she's related to the royal family in some way.
Is she?
Well, yes, so it is said. Now, I have to be clear here and say I have not looked at the line which proves this, but yes, apparently there is a connection there,
Wow.
which of course would then reinforce the theories that everything's all kept in the family.
Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it?
She's from the outside, but if that were true, then of course, then no, not at all. There are bloodline links there, as there so often are with powerful people around the world.
Interesting.
I didn't know that. It's
Yeah,
incredible.
I heard that somewhere, yeah. Okay, so, Chris, you're going to lead the way on this, Chris. So we're going to have pretty much a dialogue between Chris and Andy out there. We're all going to listen and take it all in, and then perhaps later on we can kind of ask some questions. Otherwise, because I know what's going to happen, we're all going to get excited like little schoolgirls. We're all going to want to chime in, and it's going to get confusing
Turn
and
into
messy.
chaos.
So, Chris, over to you.
Well, I mean, as I said, if you know, the most famous probably in our lifelines would be Princess Diana, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Princess Diana. So Andy, would you want to tell us the story about this, and we can all pick that apart?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Princess Diana was something which brought this kind of conspiracy theory much closer into public view because, you know, she was such a popular figure, or at least a very well-known figure, that when you get somebody like that and there is the slightest anomaly around the death, then you are going to get conspiracy theories. And I think the problem we had with Diana, so for anybody there that doesn't remember, you know, she had split with Prince Charles and then it all turned rather nasty. And she started to give these interviews which were very revealing, but she started to make comments about threatening to uncover the dark forces running the nation, and was implying that she knew secrets about the royal family that maybe they wouldn't want known. So of course, you know, when the accident occurred in the car in Paris in 97 and she died, almost immediately you found even just everyday people on the street saying, oh, that seems convenient. She'd been, you know, campaigning against landmines, and that would probably be annoying the arms companies. And, I mean, here's the thing. She was going out at this stage with Dodi Al-Fayed, and his mother is Samira Khashoggi of the arms dealing family. So, you know, maybe there were factions in that family that didn't like the link with Diana because of what she was doing with landmines. But whichever way you want to look at it, there were anomalies around the death. And that is why they had to hold, an inquest here to try to get to the bottom of it. And needless to say, the inquest said the only reason the accident happened was because the driver was drunk, basically. Paparazzi had been chasing the car, he got away, and then he lost control in the tunnel. Problem with that is there are so many issues around the evidence that allegedly proves that he was drunk. The blood sample that we are told was his blood wasn't. That's been admitted. They did mix it up with somebody else.
God.
Then they said they did an analysis of what's called the vitreous fluid in the eye when they said, but that backs up the fact that he was drunk. But not a single person that night said he was drunk. No CCTV shows him being drunk. And if you do believe the official toxicology report, well, the guy should have been so drunk he shouldn't have been able to have got out of bed that night, let alone drive a car.
You would have thought it'd be obvious, wouldn't you?
That's just the beginning of the anomalies that suddenly seemed a bit glaring. And of course, the more it went on, you've got the mysterious white Fiat that was clearly involved in the collision in the tunnel. It got away. The French authorities claimed they were never able to find it, partly because all the CCTV in that quarter of Paris was off that night. Would you believe it? And the more it went on, the stranger the story got. And, obviously there's more elements to it that we can discuss. But that's the basics of it. And that's where the conspiracy theories grew. Some polls in recent years of British people put it around 90% of British people believe that Diana was murdered. So actually the inquest was a waste of time because that's not what people in their gut believe. We are all at heart, it would seem, conspiracy theorists. So I think that's interesting. There's a level of anomaly here which is above, shall we say, just chance. That's why it's never gone away.
It is true. Everyone that you talk to about Diana's got an opinion on it, haven't they? And I remember my auntie, as soon as she died, I remember vividly her coming out saying that she was murdered.
Yeah.
And lots of people do. One of the things I was reading earlier on was one of the Richard Tomlinson. Have you heard? So he's a former MI6 agent, and he went.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
So he went to jail. It was a few months after Diana died, wasn't it? And
That's right, yes.
And what he'd sort of gone against the breaking of the Official Secrets Act. So what he did, he disclosed this, I don't know, M16 sort of plan to kill Milosevic, wasn't it? The former Serbian president.
Slobodan Milosevic.
That's what they said, yes.
And what he claims was that there was going to be a plan where he would be taken down into a tunnel, and he was chased into a tunnel, and his drivers would sort of be attacked with strobe lighting, so he would basically crash, and then they would die, or they'd finish him off, or whatever it was, which is obvious similarities to sort of what the story was with Diana, wasn't it?
Well, we should note here that it has been recorded on occasion before of organisations like the CIA taking people out like this, staging car crashes to make it look like an accident when in fact, it was caused. And we should remember, so Richard Tomlinson, so he used to work for MI6. Now, he was roundly rubbished, of course, by all the inquests. But it's quite interesting that during the inquest, the way they dealt with that, an anonymous, bear in mind, an anonymous MI6 manager, now they called her at the time Miss X, right, said in the hearing that, funnily enough, the MI6, they weren't keeping any file at all on Princess Diana, and of course it was a load of rubbish. So all we have is an anonymous denial there, and as you say, in fact, Tomlinson wound up going to prison for breaking the Official Secrets Act. But so although they say that what he had to say wasn't true, well, needless to say, the evidence against him is very murky, and the people who gave the evidence against him are anonymous. So this is the problem. And when you get claims like this, it gets very, very tangled up. But nonetheless, yes, what that all revealed was it was clearly in the minds of certain people, the kinds of people that would work for MI6 or the CIA, that you can assassinate people using staged car crashes. So it's well recognised. And I think, therefore, it cannot be ruled out that this may well have been exactly what had happened.
It just seems to me, just as you said earlier on, this lady, he must have been a professional driver, driving around dignitaries and really important people. People would notice if he went to the bar and got absolutely hammered, wouldn't they? Surely people would know.
Again, wouldn't you think that? You would think that, but what the inquest came up with to counteract they said that but the guy was a regular drinker and he got used to covering up his drunkenness very well. To me, that is not a scientific argument.
No.
But I don't believe that a professional driver would behave that way. It wouldn't make sense. Now, it is true he wasn't Diana's regular driver. That is true. But nonetheless, it seems to me, from all the evidence, that nobody thought he was drunk. And we should note here that just shortly before the inquest did blame him for everything, Honorary Paul's family had been called in and had been told by the authorities that their son would be exonerated, that he would not be blamed. That's what they were told. And yet, just a few short days later, suddenly the inquest turned that around completely and blamed it all on the driver. So these are the strange things we've got. It's almost like somebody toyed with coming up with a different explanation, and then they realised the safest thing to do was just to all blame one man, and then there's nothing more to worry about. And unfortunately, that's where it still stands to this day. But no, you will not find anybody that says he was anything other than in his normal state that night.
Well, he had, and even Dianna, she had a security guard, a bodyguard with her, and surely part of his training would be, if he thought the driver was drunk, you just don't get in the car.
Yeah, he's a bodyguard, isn't he?
You would like to hope that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yes, that's quite right.
And he survived, didn't he, the driver?
Yes, Trevor Jones, I think was his name. Yes, he has basically never spoken publicly about it. And, well, draw your own conclusions from that, but the conspiracy angle says he's probably been paid an awful lot of money never to tell anybody anything, so we're never going to hear his testimony, it would seem. But you are right, yes. You would have thought anybody that had any care for the princess at all would have been looking out for that and would never have allowed such a situation to occur. But there we are.
Or people in the bar, serving him in the bar, because apparently he was in the bar, wasn't he, drinking?
Yes, but I think only lightly, and I don't think not to the degree that toxicology report would suggest.
Yeah.
So this is only the beginning of some of the strange things. I mean, we should say, by the way, just in case we forget to say this later on. Now, Dianna, of course, was already convinced that there was a plan which she thought Prince Charles was behind to stage a car crash in which he would die. Now, we have her letters to Paul Burrell, and nobody's ever denied them. It's accepted she wrote them. So Paul Burrell was her butler. Now, he's a bit of an odd bloke in his own right, but nobody denies that the letters are real. And it's almost as if she envisaged almost exactly the scenario that then did occur. We should also note that she had a former bodyguard called Barry Manicky. Now, it was rumoured, and we can only say now that it was only ever a rumour, but it was rumoured he had an affair with Dianna. But he died in a motorbike crash, and she believed that he had been murdered. She believed that he had been bumped off because of his links with her. So she clearly was, slanted towards conspiracy beliefs herself, as she believed that she would be next. So there's a longer backstory to this, but certainly the letters are very revealing. And in the letters, she says that she thinks that the reason that Charles wanted to get rid of her, which is her belief, we don't know whether it's true or not, that is what she believed, was because he wanted to clear the way to marry Tiggy Leg Bourke. Now, Tiggy Leg Bourke was the nanny to William and Harry when they were very young. And although clearly Charles was seeing Camilla Parker Bowles as well, it was Diana's belief, and you can read it in the letter, you'll find it online, she says that Camilla is nothing but a decoy. So that's her quote, Camilla is a decoy. So there's a horrible quadrangle here at the core of all of this. And maybe somebody thought, we've got to take somebody out of this. And we should also recall, shortly before Diana had her crash, Camilla was also involved in a crash. Now, you hardly ever hear anything about this now, and you have to look up the original newspaper reports, but she claims she was run off the roads in the country lanes near her home, and when she managed to scramble out of the car, she fled the scene. She fled the crash scene. And it was implied that the reason she did that was because she thought somebody might be trying to kill her.
Wow.
Now,
That's terrifying, isn't it?
that somebody actually did try to kill her and failed, and having failed once, they realised it was going to look too obvious if they tried with Camilla again. So maybe the next best thing was to take Diana out of the quadrangle rather than Camilla. It's so much more complex than meets the eye. So, that's a whole other aspect of it that is worth remembering. But certainly Diana, you see, she seemed to believe there was a plot to kill her. The public view on that in the mainstream media is, well, she was a very paranoid woman, so so she believed any old thing. But I don't think that's quite fair, given that she clearly knew more than we know.
Yeah, it just gets really, really, really bizarre, doesn't it? Earlier on, I don't think we mentioned it actually, because there was people going missing after this, after the crash. Seems to be a really common theme, doesn't it? And there was this white Fiat Panda, wasn't there, Andy? Would you like to tell us a little bit more about the disappearing Fiat Panda?
It was a Fiat Uno, I think.
The Uno.
So the white Fiat is one of the mysterious parts of this story. So we know that at some point in the crash, a white Fiat was involved, partly because it left the white paint on the side of the Mercedes. Okay. And then it sped off. Now, there were tales of a strange bright flash. Now, that has been used by some to suggest that maybe somebody in the car flashed a very bright light into Henri Paul's eyes, and that is one of the reasons that he lost control. Of course, we have no proof one way or the other. Others say the flash was nothing more than just part of the crash. It was just a spark or something. But nonetheless, the Fiat, you would imagine, would have been very, very important to know who owned it. So the French authorities couldn't trace it, they said. The various people were put sort of forward as the possible owners. Now, it's just worth noting here that Mohammed Al-Fayed, so he used to be the owner of Harrods, and his son Dodi was, of course, at that stage going out with Dianna. He's a bit of a character, but nonetheless, his son had just died in this crash, so he had every reason to want to find out more. So he got private detectives to see if they could trace the white Fiat Uno. And his detectives came up with a man called James and Danson. Now, Danson did own a white Fiat, but he says it wasn't him. The authorities say they also don't think it was him. But, weirdly, shortly after having been exposed, and Danson was found in another car, and he was dead. And he had been, well, it would seem there was a hole in his head, which many people believe to be a bullet hole, but his head had also been detached from his body. Yeah. The car had been set alight from the outside, and so on. But the French authorities said this was suicide.
Bloody hell.
Now, it's a pretty bizarre suicide if it was, and he managed to do it very well. And of course, many other people thought, no, that's not suicide. That is the removal of somebody clearly who knew too much. So, there's a whole other backstory here around James and Danson. Now, he's not the only other person, or the only person that's been accused. There was also a man called Lee Van Pham. I'm not saying that right, it's T-H-A-N-H, but, some said that he also owned a white Fiat, but again, we've never got to the bottom of that. So, nonetheless, there was a vehicle which did something and was involved, and I think the weakness of the authorities' argument is that they've never been able to trace it officially, but the people that have been fingered either will not speak or, as with Ann Danson, have died in mysterious circumstances. Now, that's usually not a very good sign. It looks like somebody's trying to remove witnesses.
It's very, very odd. A few months ago, I'm not sure if you heard of a gentleman called Colin Tebbett. So he was Diana's driver, and he went on to. So the story is he was Diana's driver 2 years before. For 2 years before she died, he was a driver from Balmoral, and what he said is he was woken up the day that she died, and he was contacted by staff at Balmoral to say Diana had been injured, and he was asked to go to Kensington Palace. This is what he claimed on GMTV. This is on the 20th anniversary, and what he claimed was that he was taken to he went to Kensington Palace, and he was spoken to by the secretary, and basically they were watching the news unfold, and he said Robin Cook, who was what was he at the time? He was the
Foreign Secretary?
The Foreign Secretary, that's it. So he was reporting that Diana was injured, and he said that at that time then, the Secretary of Kensington Palace said, no, she died. This was quite a long time before she was actually told, well, it came out that she died. What was even more strange about this was that he was sent to Paris to collect the body.
Who's this now?
So he was Colin Tebbett. He said he went
Driver.
Yes.
the driver, and what he notes about it. So when he was on the interview, he was really vague actually. But one thing he said, which was odd, was when he went into the room where Dianna was, she was just in a bed. You know, she was dressed up in this in a bed. But what she noted, and she thought, well, you know, if there was a princess that had died, you would assume that would be lots of really high-powered, important people. He said in the room there was just lots of people that he didn't know, just wandering about, milling in and out. That she was put into a room without any curtains or anything, and he actually went, and the room was really hot, he always says. And that what he did, he had to get some blankets to put it up to the window because there was people taking pictures from a building across the road. You just think, you know, and he was just knowing. It just seems a bit odd. So why would you send the driver that hadn't dealt with her for 2 years to go and collect her body?
So who actually sent him?
Well, it would be Kensington Palace, I suppose. It
Do you
just
feel like he was a safe enough driver to do the job?
Of course, none of this is absolutely official.
Yeah.
There are disputed versions of this story, as of course the whole thing is disputed. But yeah, I mean, it is another strangeness to the whole story. But, you know, there is a whole other side to this which you very rarely hear about. Now, I myself had a contact with somebody who knew a little bit more about this, and I can't say much more than that. But because when Dianna was taken into the hospital after the crash, even before she died, now she was badly injured, but it was expected that she would survive. And the French doctors apparently believed that she would be fine. But there is a story that the English doctors arrived in the night, so English staff from wherever, Kensington Palace, who knows, suddenly arrived and basically ushered out the French staff and said, thank you very much, we'll take over now. And then, of course, shortly afterwards, it was announced that Dianna had died. Now, one of the French doctors that was there that night thought something strange had occurred because they were all very shocked that she had died when they thought that they'd got her into a position where she would not. And it is said that this driver was going to then write a book about, this doctor was going to write a book about what he saw that night. And, of course, having made that a public statement, he then died in a mysterious car crash shortly afterwards. So this is a whole other side to it, which, you know, is, I think, not been investigated enough. And it may well be that there was something very fishy about the way she passed. And, of course, Mohammed Al-Fayed has also pointed out that Diana's body was embalmed very shortly after her death, which is not sort of a strictly normal procedure. He personally thought that that was done to make sure that any pregnancy test at the post-mortem wouldn't work, because it was his opinion that she actually was pregnant with Dodi's baby. Now, again, we just don't know, but again, you've got an irregularity there, so, and you were saying about it being very hot, so yeah, so Diana's body was stored in an empty room. It was very warm conditions, of course it was in August, and all the rest of it. So they say that is why they did it. That's why they embalmed it, not for any other reason, was to preserve the body. But then, as you say, then you've got all these strange things about the body being visible and all of this. So, yes, on it goes, I'm afraid.
It's really odd. So there's a book that came out, well, it's 5 years ago now, I think it was. So it's by Alan Power, The Princess Diana Conspiracy. And what he claims, he's got evidence that, it actually says, isn't it, the evidence of murder. And what he claims is that there's an SAS operative that went to jail, Danny Nightingale, and he actually testified in the book that his ex-wife was told by another service member that they were involved in the assassination and cover-up of Diana. What do you think of that, Andy?
Well, I mean, again, here's the thing, you see, that, so yes, that is a claim. Basically Nightingale, he effectively said that the SAS were behind the death of Princess Diana, which of course would not surprise some people at all. Scotland Yard were aware of these accusations, but they basically never investigated properly, or at least they had a quick look and said it wasn't worth an investigation. They kind of left it hanging. They said, I think the exact quote was, they were in the, quote, process of drawing up conclusions, and there it was left hanging. And in the end, they did not reopen the investigation on the basis that there was, quote, no credible evidence that the SAS was involved. But then, here we go. They would say that, wouldn't they?
Yes,
so, again, yes, that is an accusation that the SAS were involved, but of course the authorities are going to deny that. I mean, they could never admit that, could they? So this is the problem you're always left with. You get to a wall where you can't really go much further, because the people that might enable you to go further, they have too vested an interest in stopping you. So this is the problem. Unless a whistleblower suddenly were to come forward and put their probably life on the line to come forward and say more, you always just get to the point where it's left hanging. So this is the unfortunate reality of not only Dianna conspiracy theories, but other assassination theories too. You're often left not coming to a clear conclusion. You can come to a reasonable conclusion that yes, it almost certainly was conspiracy, but then who exactly, where exactly, you're always stymied by the fact that the people that have that knowledge will never admit to it. And so this is the way the world works, I'm afraid, when it comes to conspiracies.
Well, it's similar as well, isn't it? And that leads quite nicely on to Dr. David Kelly and his strange...
yes, well, exactly right.
And his strange...
Well, I mean, Dr. David Kelly, now, I know there are some people there now, sadly this is beginning to fade away into history, but it shouldn't, because I think it's quite important. So, for anybody that's forgotten, so Dr. David Kelly was a key UN weapons inspector. And in 2003, of course, the Tony Blair administration was planning to invade Iraq on the basis that Saddam Hussein had all these weapons of mass destruction. Okay, so most of us know that. But, of course, Kelly, he was in the know that there were no weapons of mass destruction. And he felt that he couldn't let this go ahead. So he spoke to the BBC. He spoke to a journalist called Andrew Gilligan. And, of course, Gilligan then broke the story. Without naming Kelly, he broke the story on the BBC, saying that, they knew very well that this was basically a phony war. Well, Blair and Alistair Campbell, who was his, media advisor at that point, went mad when this happened. And instead of coming clean, of course, what they decided to do was expose Kelly. Very unusual. So they released Kelly's name to the press and tried to basically then, destroy his character. He was described by one man as a Walter Mitty-like fantasist and things like this, even though, until the week before, he'd been one of their very top weapons inspectors. Poor old Kelly was hauled before parliamentary committees and investigations, and it was all very humiliating. And then he was found dead in the woods near his home in Oxfordshire. So the official version says, well, he committed suicide. He was so humiliated, so depressed that, he couldn't handle it. Well, rather like Dianna, virtually everybody I met in the wake of that news of his suicide went, that wasn't suicide. Of course they bumped him off. And it's funny, isn't it? And even now there's a general just assumption, well, of course they killed him because he was the man who knew too much. And the problem is that even MPs, or as they were then, like Norman Baker, even he wrote a book called The Strange Death of David Kelly, saying this is murder. It's just so obviously murder and not suicide. Now, okay, Baker put it down to Iraqi dissidents doing it, but a lot of other people would say it's almost certainly closer to home. And again, you've got so many anomalies. I mean, number one, the body, which was originally found by two members of the search party, was found slumped kind of peacefully against a tree. But the police photographs showing the body show the body sprawled on the ground with a knife next to the body. Now, it's as if they redressed the scene to make it look like a proper suicide. The wounds in his wrists were minimal and couldn't have killed him. He had an issue with manipulating cutlery with one hand anyway, and many people have pointed out the knife, the gardening knife that allegedly he would have cut himself with. He wouldn't have been able to have done it. And the wounds were too small anyway. It was minimal blood loss, not a lot of drug in his system. These were all the reasons that were given that he had committed suicide in this manner. None of it adds up. And when you then look at the Lord Hutton report, so because there were so many arguments about was it murder, was it suicide, Lord Hutton, who, by the way, had a good history of covering up various government atrocities in the past, so they got the right man there. He basically just produces a report saying, no, of course it was suicide, that's that. Well, there was a consortium of British doctors who just, that alone, they said, we cannot accept that without clear medical evidence. Because in the report, and by the way, the Hutton report was created specifically to decide the cause of death. But before the Hutton inquiry had even finished, the coroner suddenly produced a death certificate saying it was suicide. That was irregular too. And Norman Baker actually stood up in the Commons and challenged that and said this goes against all protocol. The whole point was to find out how he died. But by releasing the death certificate, it's like everybody went, oh, well, there we are. We don't need to look into it anymore. It was just suicide. But it's gone on, and it's gone on. So when Hutton was then asked to produce the medical records, he said he wouldn't. And instead, he put a 70-year stop on the medical records. That's where it stands now. So we've got, 60 or whatever years to go before we ever see the medical records. And just last year, right, there was a new call for reopening the, inquiry into Kelly's death. And some people were calling for Kelly's body to be exhumed. And the response of the authorities to that was to dig up Kelly's body in the middle of the night so nobody could see they were doing it, and they cremated him. And they wonder why they get conspiracy theorists. So I'm afraid that is what we're dealing with. The denial and the very strange behaviour of the authorities has done nothing now but guarantee nobody's ever going to believe the official story of Dr. David Kelly's death. And, we will await with bated breath for the next 60-odd years to see these medical records, and we shall see, won't we?
It's just, surely that's illegal, though, just to dig someone up and exhume them, presumably without any sort of permission by family or...
Oh, I imagine that they managed to do it probably with the permission of the family, but all done on the quiet. It was just done primarily to keep it out of the public gaze. So, and of course, once Kelly's body was cremated, well, you can't do anything more, can you? You can't exhume ashes. So it's over. So we will never now be able to re-examine the physical evidence. So I fear that this is again, and I think that was the whole idea, another one of these things that's just going to hang in the air forevermore. And the powers that be behind all of this, no doubt they're hoping that it will just fade away.
Yeah.
Like JFK, like 9/11. Yes, there'll always be a sense that there were many conspiracy theories about it, but it'll be impossible to prove it one way or the other when enough generations have gone by. And I think certainly that is what they're hoping with Kelly. Yeah.
Well, it's crazy. Talking about JFK then, Andy. So at your talk, you talked a little bit about, and this is a bit of, I suppose it's related, about Marilyn Monroe and the conspiracies around her passing as well.
Yeah, I don't say that much about that because I think that's all fairly well known. But Marilyn Monroe, it is acknowledged, had an affair with both John F. Kennedy and also his brother Robert Kennedy. So she's been passed around and I think used and abused. And the general view is that she knew too much. She was a bit of a wild card. She was sadly an alcoholic and a drug addict, sadly. And I think there was a feeling that she was a loose cannon, and that if they didn't silence her, she might well start saying things that could be difficult. And listen, again, it's another unresolved death. Yes, we're told it was suicide, but there's a lot of evidence around that. And I'm no expert on Marilyn, but which again says that it was very likely murder. So, that's just the half of it when it comes to JFK, isn't it? But yes, there are many things surrounding Kennedy, even before his own assassination, that make him a prime target for conspiracy theories.
And JFK then. So Andy, what is your version of that? The film JFK. Obviously, most people have seen it now, and he brings up quite a few interesting points, doesn't he? Well, he brings up a few questions, doesn't he? It's the gunman on the grassy knoll, and I know Jesse Ventura does. Jesse Ventura, who he's got a television program, about conspiracies and what he claims he's a top marksman. He tried to reproduce those shots and things like that, and he claims he couldn't have done it even.
It's ballistics, isn't it? Ballistics plays a big part in that conspiracy.
Yeah, and having that knowledge as well, isn't it? You know, because I was reading this article, and there was a claim that maybe one of the bodyguards had accidentally shot him in the head.
Yeah, the drive from behind, wasn't it?
Yeah. What do you think, Andy?
Well, again, it's one of these areas where there is simply no way we are ever going to get absolutely fully to the bottom of this. But what we can say is, again, the majority of people do not accept that it was a single gunman. It is very complex. There are many factions here and many possibilities. But so let's just get the basic facts for anybody that doesn't know. So in November 1963, President Kennedy is in an open-top car, and you've got other people in the car with his wife, and he is, of course, shot dead during the parade. So you've probably all seen the films. His head explodes, and on the surface it seems simple. So the Warren Commission, which initially investigated, said it was one man, Lee Harvey Oswald, who, you know, had communist links and was fanatical in some areas, and yet, of course, here's the problem. Now, there are many arguments around this. Some say he was there and he did fire some of the shots. Some say he was never there at all and didn't fire any of the shots. But the official view is he fired all of the shots and that there were only 3 shots. So yes, as you just said a minute ago, that's where you get into ballistics, because this is where some people say there is simply no way 3 shots could have done as much damage as you see occurring, and as, you know, the reports would seem to suggest. So that's problematic, because if you say that only one man fired all the bullets, you know, in the famous courtroom scene in the movie JFK with Kevin Costner, they describe the ridiculousness of the idea of one bullet passing through about 4 different things in 2 different people, and the general view is this is not possible. But you have to believe that's possible to believe that it was a single gunman. Now, if it wasn't a single gunman, you're getting into more interesting territory, because then you're saying that it wasn't just a lone fanatic, but it was a coup d'etat, effectively. You know, this was an organised conspiracy that involved clearly lots of people. Now, we should remember, now you mentioned the grassy knoll there. So the grassy knoll, which you often hear about with Kennedy, is a raised area of grass in Dealey Plaza in Dallas where the shooting took place. And there were people sitting there. Now, they claimed they heard shots coming from over this kind of concrete wall at the top there. And this is something which is backed up by the audio recorders on the police belts. The police had what they call the addictor belt recorders. So they had audio recorders. Now, the police record at least 6 shots. Now, some people that don't accept the conspiracy theorists have said, no, it's just acoustic rebound and all of that. But, of course, that then counteracts the testimony of the people at the grassy knoll. So Oswald was said to be in a school building nearby, and clearly that is not where these other shots were coming from. Now, you can stretch this on and on. You're quite right. Channel 5 keeps showing this documentary that says, all right, there was another bullet, but it was accidental. It went off from a security guard's gun, and they've had to cover this up all these years. You're not going to find that many people in the world of real conspiracy thinking that are going to back that up, because there are so many things that simply doesn't explain, or at least if that did happen, that was not the only other bullet going on, or the only other extra bullet. You also have claims that one of the driver of the car, a man called William Greer, in some frames, he kind of quickly turns around after the first shot occurs and does something, and it's not clear what he does. Some have said, is he firing an extra bullet? Literally at point-blank range.
Gosh.
There is also evidence that somebody might have been standing in the storm drain. And at the end of the day, here's the thing, we don't truly know, but you can say there's something very wrong with the whole thing. But, of course, we never got to hear Lee Harvey Oswald's testimony, because he himself was then shot dead by a man called Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby is a very interesting man, because he then himself was then found dead in the police cell shortly afterwards.
Gosh.
And it was clearly obvious that he actually had links with Oswald himself, and almost certainly with the CIA. Many people believe the CIA were involved in setting up the shooting. Some even implicate Lyndon Johnson, who famously never liked the Kennedys. He worked with them, but he didn't like them, and in the end he replaced Kennedy as president. So you've got this long chain of network, and then you've got all the arguments about who would have given the orders, because even if the CIA was involved, who was behind it? Was it Fidel Castro? Was it the mafia? Was it the bankers or the Soviets? And then you get into all kinds of lists. But the general view today is that this was a kind of a new world order move. Kennedy was making slightly, perhaps unwise speeches where he was threatening to reveal the way the world was really being run. He was interested in things like UFOs and that, and also said that he thought the Americans and the Russians should pool their knowledge, and that didn't go down well in some circles. So, there were people probably queuing up to get rid of Kennedy by the end. And that enables, in a way, all the conspiracy theories to be quite diluted, because it's very hard to pinpoint absolutely what the final story was. But certainly there is a hell of a lot more to it than even we know now, and I'm sure that there is more to come out even as we speak now.
Well, we were talking before we actually called today, weren't we, Ratty? And we were talking about some people in the know, and Ratty was saying that why would they, if they had the knowledge and they were killed, it would be a bit too obvious. But it happens, doesn't it? When people do speak out, people do go missing. There was there was a spy, Gareth Williams, wasn't there? A Welsh spy. He was found in London. Can you remember about 4 or 5 years ago? And what he was found was in a bar, in a suitcase, in a bathtub. Right. Padlocked in and things like that. And they said that he killed himself, but subsequently there's been sort of allegations that he'd been maybe killed by the Russian mafia or some links to Russia. But people, I was saying to Ratty, people do go missing, and lots of people go missing. I'm not sure if
they do, and I think when you start to see a pattern of that, of course. That's when it does start to look suspicious. I mean, just briefly going back to Kennedy.
Yeah.
So not only did Jack Ruby die in the police cell, but a woman that used to work for Jack Ruby in one of his rather dodgy nightclubs. Now, we need to remember she claimed that she overheard Ruby and Oswald together in the back room of Ruby's club with men she believed to be CIA. Shortly before the shooting of Kennedy, she heard them talking about how they were going to conduct the shooting. Now, she actually did go to the police. She told them of what she had heard, and she warned them and said that she thought they were going to try and kill the president. Well, of course, when that did happen, she was in a very compromised position. She hadn't been believed, but then suddenly it turned out she was right. And of course, needless to say, shortly after that, poor old Rose Girami finds herself lying dead by the side of the road. So again, you've got that. Many of the people at the grassy knoll died mysteriously early of various ailments and weird suicides and things. And you can see this pattern in a number of areas. That is also true, I must say, of 9/11. People like Barry Jennings, who had quite incriminating, eyewitness evidence about Building 7 being partially demolished from the inside long before it even did its weird collapse later on. He died in early circumstances. Other witnesses that saw things seem to have died in a peculiar way you can't quite put your finger on, and that's the whole idea. But in the end, a pattern builds. And in fact, one of the worst ones, and I implicate nothing by saying this, but I believe that anybody that's either worked with the Clintons, Bill and Hillary, or tried to investigate them, they don't tend to last long. There's a website called the Arkansas Sudden Death Syndrome that lists over 50 people who've died in the most mysterious of ways by threatening to expose the Clintons. And, you got weird cases like one of them drank himself to death on domestic mouthwash. This is what we're dealing with here. So, yes, no, that doesn't necessarily mean the Clintons are doing it. I'm not saying that, because I don't want to be next. But there might well be people around who don't like their friends and colleagues much. So, this is the thing. You can see patterns clearly emerging. We live in a world where, unfortunately, there are people around who would see this as a perfectly normal and reasonable way to behave, to take out anybody that's in their way. It's a sad fact of life, I'm afraid.
It's very tragic. Have you heard of a man called Phil Snyder? Phil Snyder, he claims that he was working for he's a geologist. He claims he was working for the American government making the DUMBs, deep underground military bases, and he says that he was making them and they were using alien technology, and that he built, 20 all across the world. He then left and he started going around talking about aliens and talking about the bases and how the governments are working with aliens and allowing them to kidnap people. And what he claims is that he was involved in a battle, the Dulce battle, where humans and aliens had killed each other. Anyway, after his last I think it was in Chicago or something, he did this a lecture. And then a few days later, he was found hung. And he'd always claimed that if he died, he was not suicidal. He'd never idolised killing himself or anything like that. However, after his speech, and he was warned not to do the speech, he was found hung in a hotel room a few days later. His family have always maintained that.
Yeah, I'm aware of that case, and unfortunately that's not the only one. I mean, there's conspiracy theories about the death of John Mack. John Mack was the Harvard professor of psychiatry who decided to investigate people who had had alien abductions. Now, he began as a skeptic, but he wanted to try to understand what was going on psychologically, and he did a lot of studies, interviewed people, and in the end he concluded, to the annoyance of his own colleagues, that actually he thought there was something going on here, or that at the very least the people who believed they'd seen aliens and had interaction with them, they weren't mad, they were merely recounting something that felt real to them. Anyway, so he was on a lecture tour of Britain, and I believe in London, shortly, sadly, I have to say, after having spoken at the conference that I helped to organise, the Glastonbury Symposium, so he gave one of the last talks he did for us, but he was coming out of the lecture hall in London, and a car suddenly ploughed into him.
Oh,
now,
my God.
many people have said, why did that happen? The car was allegedly a drunk driver and it was all an accident, but of course others have said this was Manchurian candidate stuff, that, he'd been mind controlled to take out John Mack, because Mack was now talking very loudly and quite credibly about the existence of aliens and all of this. So, yeah, I'm afraid that if there's the slightest strangeness to a death of anybody connected to that, you are going to get conspiracy theories. And they won't always be true, but equally sometimes they might be. And again, it comes down to being able to identify the patterns. And certainly it does look like sometimes people who, know too much are silenced quite effectively.
So, Andy, is there any conspiracy theories out there, particularly popular ones, which you just don't buy? You just can't see any kind of truth behind them?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, I will listen to anything. I will be open to any theory with a certain level of evidence. But I do need some evidence.
Yeah.
I will not just believe anything because somebody else believes it. I need to understand what the arguments are. So, I mean, you get bizarre ones like, Princess Diana was murdered on the orders of Hillary Clinton because apparently Diana was just about to be married to Bill Clinton in a secret occult ceremony. Now, that's quite a fun story, but I have never seen the slightest dot of evidence for it. So you have to kind of put that aside, really. I think one of the issues I have, which has gone, I think, a little bit too far at the moment, is the crisis actors theory.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes. Yeah.
you get terror atrocities, and it has happened, and I am fully aware of this, where actually there are no victims, but it's politically convenient to pretend there were. Now, there's good evidence that there's certainly in somewhere like Iraq. You'll find it on YouTube. There's a clip, for instance, where clearly everybody had been warned it was going to go off. So you see the car bomb go off, and there's nobody in the street. But as soon as it goes off, all these people suddenly run into the street and all lie down on the ground looking like they're injured. Because, of course, that gives them more political sort of clout. It makes a point. They look like the injured party, and, you can make gains from that. But of course, some people say, well, that's happened everywhere, from the Boston Marathon to the whole Sandy Hook business, which is what Alex Jones is now going through, being sued by the parents of the kids who they say they did die.
That is
never existed.
That's bad, isn't it?
Shocking.
My issue here is that although I think there are many unanswered questions about these things, unless you have absolute evidence to say that something was staged, I think we need to be careful. Because, I mean, like, for instance, the Westminster Bridge, atrocity a year or so back, a lot of people I respect and have a lot of time for, they don't believe it, and they say that it was all done with dummies and actors, and actually nobody was killed. And my issue there is that, I've looked into that, and I am not yet convinced, because it seems to me that that's an awful lot of people you've either got to pay to front this up, or mind control. Because it isn't just the victims lying on the ground with the ketchup. You've also got all the rescue workers. You've got people in the hospitals. They've all got to be fake.
It's a
they
huge
all
production.
go on the record. They speak in front of cameras. Then you've got the relatives, the people that say they knew the victims. They must also be acting or mind controlled to believe this too. Then you've got all the people that show up at the funerals who apparently know these people.
Colleagues
so by the time you top this up,
Ridiculous,
you've got something like several thousand individuals that you have to pay or mind control to front this. And my issue there is, wouldn't it just be easier to do the atrocity? You know, we've acknowledged here there are people in the world that will kill to get their way. 9/11, classic example. Whoever you think was behind it, the reality is somebody there thought sacrificing 3,000 or so people wasn't a big deal. It was worth it. So why stage something and go to all the risk of being found out when easily one of these witnesses could either break their programming, or if they're not getting paid enough, they could suddenly come forward and blow the whistle. It seems to me a dangerous policy when all you need to do is mind control at least one or two people at the most, just to do it. So this is my problem. And although I understand, and I do believe there have been crisis actor events, I do, I think it's now got to the point where anything that happens that looks like a terror attack, almost within minutes around social media, you can predict somebody will say it was fake, and sure enough they do. But I don't always really see the grounds to believe that. So these are ones that I'm sort of in the middle on. I put it in the grey box now, and I'm not condemning people that do say that, because they have every ground not to believe what the authorities tell them. We need to understand this. This is how bad trust has got between the authorities and people, that we now are thinking, did this even happen? But to me, I am not yet convinced by the evidence in some of these cases, I'm afraid. So this is where I tend to stand back. Now, of course, you'll always get some people then will attack me and say, oh, well, you're just a shill because you don't believe that. Well, no. I just want to see more evidence. And I'm not yet convinced, because it seems to me it's just so much easier to do an atrocity. What's the problem? So, that's an area that I'm very cautious about. Let's put it like that. But, hey, with convincing evidence, I will listen. That's what I always say. Stack it up, and I will look at it, and I will consider it, always. I would never rubbish anybody that has a view on something, because they may have grounds to have that view. But personally, as you asked me, that's an area I think we need to be just careful about, not to go into the knee-jerk denial before we have the full facts.
Andy, I've got a question for you. This is Tom. Doing what you do, have you ever any weird things happen to you? Have you ever felt like your phone's been tapped? Anything odd like that?
Well, I mean, here's the thing, of course. Now, if it had happened, I probably wouldn't tell you, would I? Because I would have been warned not to. Because otherwise I'd be giving the game away. But that's where you can go mad. Here's the thing. I think the people that tend to be in trouble the most are, as we've already acknowledged in this discussion, are witnesses. Key witnesses who saw very incriminating things connected with assassinations or various dubious events. They are the ones that tend to vanish the most. Now, if all the leading sort of figures in the conspiracy world started one by one, to be assassinated or taken down, of course all that does is then give them credibility, because then everyone goes, well, hey, look, they're obviously taking them out because they know too much. So I think it's much safer just to treat you and me and all the people in this world as nutters, which is what they do. check the brakes, you're just going to enter insanity that way, and then never the one again. So, no, I think for the most part, I don't think any of us have to worry. I think it's people that have seen too much are the ones that need to be slightly more cautious.
Right, so before we end this, Andy, this may be kind of, cutting to the chase, but in your opinion, from your research, what is the agenda of the elite, if there is any? What is going on?
Well, I'm not this. I've written about this at length. If you read my book, The Truth Agenda, I try to get under the skin of exactly that. What is their agenda? What do they want to get out there? And I try to discuss it in some detail because I think we all get a bit black and white about it. It's pretty obvious that the main motivation, and it always has been, is money and power. Power comes in a number of different ways. And I think, you have that overarching belief that some people have, which I think is quite possible, that we as a race are incredibly powerful people. Collective consciousness, the power that we have is something which actually those at the top find very hard to control. Is undermine that power. They have to make us not believe in ourselves. They have to distract us. They have to zap us with every wave and every mind control device they can to try to weaken our resolve. Because, if we all stood up and said no to their agendas tomorrow, it would end. But it's only because the majority don't, because they haven't got the time, or they're too distracted to see what's going on, or they don't care. That's why it carries on. So I think there is an agenda to control, and some of it may well have a cult layers to it. It may well have a religious basis to it. But I would suspect that anybody that is doing that on that basis, they must believe in it. They must believe that they are right. But I think that's where perhaps we have some hope. Because hubris normally leads to somebody tripping themselves up. And so what we have to do is hold clear to the truth, and at least a positive way of thinking, not falling into the same arguments and the same power games that they fall into. You have to retain as much as possible some level of purity and live in a way that is not like the way that they live. So you can see all around you how we are manipulated by fear, by people basically being extremely greedy. I mean, let's face it, a lot of the world's problems could be solved tomorrow if the people at the tops of the glass towers decided to apply themselves. But they don't, and they serve themselves. And of course then there will always be the conspiracy theories around them. So the agenda is fairly obvious. Now beyond that you've got power. It's still power of, the talk of all the paedophile rings and all of that. That is still about power over people. The occult agenda is about power. And it's about people who fundamentally probably feel weak, but they want to feel powerful. So they attach themselves to these agendas and get themselves into positions of power, usually through their psychopathic tendencies, which many of them do have, as has been well investigated. And that's how they do it. Instead of finding power within themselves and within their own lives, so in a way we should feel sorry for them. But unfortunately we haven't got time to do that, because the damage that they leave in the wake of their devastation through that controlled agenda is all too plain to see. And that is why we need to keep counteracting it. Keep talking about these things now while we can, especially before the internet is completely rid of all alternative information, which is happening very fast now. So we need to keep this information going out there, keep talking, and that's why shows like yours are really important, because you're doing that, you're getting this stuff out there, you're keeping the conversations going. So that's how I think we balance it, and you have to hope somewhere down the line the scales will tip. You must believe that, because otherwise you're giving in, and again, we mustn't do that. You've always got to keep pushing on with literally the truth agenda.
So Andy, before we sign off, tell us what's next for you and where people can reach you.
Okay, what's next? So I'm working on, hopefully, at some point, an updated version of my book, Conspiracies, which came out 5 years ago now, so obviously an awful lot of stuff happened since then. So that's probably going to be the next project. In the meantime, I'm always speaking, I'm always out there somewhere, and if anybody wants to find out what I'm up to, where I'm speaking next, please look at my website, which is truthagenda.org. You'll find out where I'm speaking
I was there in Cardiff, it was awesome.
In the last few months, and hopefully there will be more. I'll be back in Bristol next year in January, and hopefully there'll be more dates. So if you go to my website, look at upcoming dates, you'll see where I'm speaking, and keep an eye on the website. You'll find out what's going on there.
That's been well, Andy. You've really blown our minds.
Fantastic, isn't it?
Absolutely fantastic talking to you, and hopefully you can come on again sometime soon.
Hopefully me get you in person, Andy.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It'd be a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant.
All right, thanks for that, Andy. Speak to you soon. Cheers, Andy. Thanks. Bye, mate.
Bye now.
Sorry about that.
Delay at the end of the call. We had a bit of a technical issue then, boys. We dropped a bit of the audio, so we'll probably use the GoPro audio for that little section there. But I'll be absolutely fine. No, that was fantastic. I tell you what, talking to Andy, I really want to discuss the political left and where it's pushing us in terms of control of media and stuff like that. But maybe we can have a discussion with Andy again.
It'd be great to act physically when Andy's here next.
Yeah.
To physically get him here, you know, it'd be really, really interesting.
Yeah, I hate doing over the phone conversations because it's so bloody. We're all trying to get a word in and all that, but that went really well and. Yeah, great.
He's so interesting.
Stuff.
Yeah, he knows his stuff.
He talks about like the history of it, and he says, actually, one of the first conspiracies is like Guy Fawkes. Is like,
Chris.
Oh, sorry. What did I do?
He's unlike Chris, right? You might know it's Chris.
Chris is alive with the mic. He forgets that we're on a podcast.
You've got to talk into the mic, otherwise it doesn't work.
Do you realise you're still recording?
Yeah.
But no, Steve, what do you think, Steve?
He's class.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, he's good stuff, man. I wonder if it was a
I can't really
reptilian
talk
stuff.
much about it because I don't read up on
Yeah,
stuff like
yeah.
It's only
Good listening, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's good listening.
David Icke should be shitting himself right now, shouldn't he?
I want the question. I was hoping he was going to like mention David Icke and the reptilian stuff because I find that fascinating. I just wonder if that was a bit too far for him, but maybe next time we can have a good discussion about it. And
it's difficult with something like that because you could spend an hour just speaking on the one sort of story, couldn't you? Do you know
I
what
could
mean?
have asked him a million questions.
There's so many.
That's the thing. I mean, when it's touching it, and my MacBook is going nuts. It keeps stopping and doing this and all that, so I think we'll have to call it a day.
Yeah.
So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed that. LadChatPodcast@yahoo.com. Get in touch. Just drop us an email. We're on YouTube. And what was the guy's name?
Sorry? Oh, this guy freaking slagging me off.
Someone's getting
What was it? Super Leeds.
Super Leeds, thanks for your comments.
Yeah.
We bought Tom some crayons.
They did actually buy me some crayons.
Chris, what's it like to be the likeable twin?
Yeah.
So anyway, we like the comments.
Yeah, keep them coming. Good old
coming.
bag, keep going.
We got broad shoulders.
That's right, boys, that's right. So yeah, Let's Chat Podcast, Yahoo, Twitter, SoundCloud, iTunes, Facebook. Get in
FM radio,
touch.
they keep checking
FM radio.
Yeah, if FM radio actually want to contact us and tell us what the hell they are,
Yeah,
we'd be
quite
interested to
interested
They're
know.
actually out there. Anyway, so goodbye.